on one sec, man. All right, we're good. We're good.
We're good. We're ready to go.
I think so, man. I just got to figure this out. We're good. What's
Good.
happening?
Again, welcome. We're so proud to have you on board with us, and thank you for making the time for us at the
Always.
museum. We have a lot of friends in the house, so I want to welcome everyone and all your friends and your crew especially. And of course, I'm wearing one of your official shirts. So Wes, we have a lot to cover. So what I want to do really quickly is, just as I normally do, turn my screen around and just read a quick paragraph about you to let people know who you are, what you've done as we go through this artist talk.
Okay.
Just adjust my monitor and we are good to go. Wes Isaac Rubenstein started his train writing career in the mid-'80s. He created his first graffiti piece at the age of 11, and upon entering New York City's Music and Art High School in 1983, forgive me, you started in 1983, where you met Keo, and you were writing on trains and affiliated with crews like X-Men, FC, and Bronx Style Crew, among others. In the following years, you teamed up with members of IBM, TC5 during the final epoch of subway painting. In 1992, he joined fellow writers Brew, Surge, and Bluster to launch Pnb Clothing. Pnb would become a driving force in the burgeoning streetwear market and would begin to put political and cultural messages on skate and hip hop gear. Later, brands would take to this formula and run with it, like Echo, Large, and others. Wes began developing his studio practice in 2000 and started experimenting with transparent letters and taking them out of their linear form. His practice led him to the abstraction of graffiti, and he joined the art collective Barnstormers, enabling him to explore art outside the bounds of traditional graffiti. Since 2005, West has served as special projects director at fashion brand Supreme, where he works with some of the most famous individuals of our time, including Mike Tyson, Jeff Koons, Lady Gaga, Lou Reed, Damien Hirst, John Baldessari, RZA, to name a few. Now, West, I've known you for some time. We've been friends in dialogue for a long time about culture, art, and practice and process. And one of the things that I've learned about you, and I think this first slide will testify to that, is that you're a kid that had a lot of discipline. And so I want to start in the beginning about your story. And what we're looking at now is a letter from grade school where you've written numerous times, "The time I've missed can never be made up." Give me an idea about that discipline and this particular image that we're looking at.
I mean, you know, as a kid, I don't think they do this anymore, but as a child in the public schools, if you were being punished somehow, they would make you write something over and over and over. That was kind of a form of punishment. So I kept that letter. I mean, that was just from, you know, grade school. I don't know what I had done wrong, but something, and my teacher made me write that phrase, "The time I've missed can never be made up," probably on a few pages. So I don't consider myself a particularly disciplined person, but you know, that that's something that public schools used to do when we were kids.
Well, writing would become a discipline for you, and
Sure.
and you would find graffiti in your life as a young kid. Let's talk about those early years, because I think, you know, some of the, like was set up on the top, some of the people that you had been mentored by would go on to be quite accomplished. But I want to know how they informed you, how graffiti informed you about finding yourself as an artist.
Well, I think, you know, all of us who've been in this game for a long time, we've had many mentors. You know, I have had many mentors in graffiti. Um, the ones that really stand out for me and come to mind. Sometimes your mentors are your friends. It's not necessarily like they're older or they're masters. They just put you onto game and put you onto practice. And for me, I think Keo was probably the first person who really taught me the do's and don'ts about kind of style writing and what the graffiti culture was about. But I would also include Flight, who kind of stylistically gave me my first alphabet, taught me how to piece. When I first met Flight, I was just bombing insides of trains. So he kind of saw that I had potential to kind of elevate what I was doing and kind of gave me my first basics. And also people like Poke and Doze, you know, people like Poke was a partner, but he was more advanced than I was in terms of style when we met. So even though he didn't mentor me in the traditional sense, he was a mentor in the sense that he, you know, he taught me a lot about style, Genesis. So yeah.
And tell me about where you grew up in New York and what that was like in that era.
I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and you know, I was a kid who was born and raised, you know, in the 70s and 80s, and it was a different time entirely. But it was kind of old New York before New York had really changed dramatically. And even though I was from that neighborhood, I think because we all had access to the subways, you know, I was spending time in Lower Manhattan, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx. You know, I was traveling a lot, as were all of us at that time. So I was exposed to a lot quite young, you know, and I got to see a lot and learn a lot about other neighborhoods and places. But um, Upper West Side, like most of New York in those days, even though it was a big city, felt kind of like a small neighborhood, you know, like you kind of knew people and everybody knew you. So
Yeah, and we should underscore too that it was a dangerous time in New York, right? For a young kid to be out there painting and being out in the streets,
yeah,
there was not only risk to get arrested, but also you had to contend with people out in the streets. Right now, we're looking at a picture of a young West that the late Jim Prigoff, he photographed you.
yeah.
Uh, and let tell me a bit about the risks you were willing to take to get up.
I mean, I think all of us, you know, we, you know, we were all in kind of. I think once you cross the line, I think in graph, and you really start bombing trains and you start really taking it seriously, it becomes, I've heard other people say this, but it becomes addictive. You know, you sort of like the more you do and the more you see your work and you see your name up and you taste fame, for a young kid, that's extremely potent and powerful. And I think that taste of fame at a young age really motivated me. And of course, at that time, you know better than anyone, it was extremely competitive. So, you know, my crew, we were young and we were just kind of stepping into the arena, if you will. And we were in the shadows of great legends and giants in graffiti history. So we kind of had something to prove. And I think we were competitive. And not just with older generations, but also with our contemporaries. You know, crews were battling, and you know, not in the literal sense, but we were all competing against each other. And I think that's what elevated the art. So, you know, as far as risk taking, I mean, I've been arrested, I've been in fights, I've been jumped. I mean, I'd kind of been through, I'm sure, what all of us have been through who are in that environment. But I
Before I
was
get
all,
to the Yeah, before I get to the next slide, and we have Jim up on screen. Do you remember this photograph? Do you have any recollections of Jim
because at that
to
time,
share?
only that, you know, really, I wasn't super connected to Jim, but I was connected to Henry because we would roll down to Henry's studio, you know, in Soho and look at pictures and try to learn things. And I started kind of a dialogue with Henry, and I forgot how it happened, but Henry was like, he wanted to come up and see some of my work and what I had been painting and be in my neighborhood and see, you know, pieces. And Henry brought Jim with him. And of course, at that time, I didn't know who I was amongst. I didn't know how great Jim was, and I didn't know his history, but he was, but he was just taking pictures of Henry and I and my crew. Risk was there. Please, Rest in Peace was there. Oh Boy FC was there. And he just kind of was documenting the moment, hanging out with Henry. But, I had mentioned in a post, I ran into Jim a few times and actually worked with Jim on a project for work. And he was just super kind and amazing and a youthful spirit.
Yeah, he left the world a better place. He contributed to a lot of lives, and
Yep.
and he again, it seems he took a baby picture of you, right? This is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Moving forward, let's talk about your crew. You have an amazing crew, FC Fame City, that you're a member of. Let's talk about the importance of crews amongst the writing community. And here we see your Fame City member card. I have a question in terms of getting into the crew. Did you have to get jumped in, or what did you have to do to prove yourself to get into the crew?
No. You didn't have to get jumped in, but I think the card came from a time when, if you recall, people wearing beads, and Zulu Nation had kind of like beads and a way to show that you were a member of that crew. And at the time, Risk and I were talking, and there were a lot of kids who were like, "Yo, I'm down with FC," and we were hearing that a lot from people from places that we knew. It was very controlled at that time. Thud, who previously wrote Phil 167, myself, and Gel from Yonkers were the only people who could put someone down with FC. So, we were hearing that a lot of people were claiming to be down, and this was sort of a way to officialize membership. But no one really ever got jumped into FC. But we modeled ourselves after crews that were extremely tight-knit, like TC5 and the X-Men, and we tried to keep a discipline in the crew. And I was fortunate because I was surrounded by, greats. So we were loyal to each other, and we kept each other's back, and we painted with each other. We were really more like a family than just a crew that, in a lot of graffiti crews, it's just like, these letters or these, these names, but it doesn't really mean a lot. But for us, like in your generation, the crew really was everything. And as I mentioned earlier, because we were new to the game and trying to make a name for ourselves, we had to really come correct and look out for one another, and both in terms of physical protection, but also in terms of our style guidance. And I think we're at a stage now where one of the things that makes me happiest is when someone remarks on a piece of someone and says, "Oh, that's that's FC style." That makes me feel good, because it makes me feel like there's been a collective creation, something that we collectively, and it's not just me, but it's me and Serge and Zane and Zier and all these countless, Dash and Teal and all these different people who've contributed to that style, which in essence is a Broadway style, but I think we've succeeded in that.
And the image we're looking at is the crew lined up in front of a train on a layup. That's extraordinary. There's 3, 6, 8 of you guys up there rolling deep. Was that common? How deep were you guys rolling into layups? Was it?
Well, this wasn't. This is a part of a bunch of cars that were pulled out on one weekend. The car we're standing in front of is IBM Masters that was done by Polk and Coase. I was there. I did a car next to it, a single solo car by myself with a character. But I was there, and we were hanging out that night. This is Monday morning on 125th Street. And in this photo is Serve, myself, Slin2, Zier, Psycho, Polk, Coase, and Risk. And we used to just, pull the emergency brake on the other side and then take pictures. But when we had enough time, we jumped in the tracks and on 125th.
So I was just going to say that it's not common to find a middle track train parked. So did you guys pull the brakes so that you can run the tracks?
Yeah, we did that every Monday. I mean, it was unfortunate. Now I think about all the poor riders who were getting stopped, but we pulled that brake pretty much every Monday to catch photos. So but we were deep. I mean, that's where you and I met. And I think in 80, 85. But was benching. I mean, I think there was a time between late 84 and mid 86 when you would come up to 125th, you might see 30, 40 of us, you know?
Yeah, I think that one time, I think maybe John One was with you guys. I had just quit,
Yep,
and perhaps I did that Kel piece or the Shy piece, but you
yep,
guys were the next generation, right? And it's really interesting. We had a talk recently, and you were talking about that perhaps you guys are the lost generation, the generation that people don't talk about.
I think so.
And you guys were quite prolific because you saw graffiti towards the tail end of its existence on the trains.
That's right. We saw that and we were in your shadows. You know, we were in the shadows of you guys, of RTW and Rock and CIA and all of the greats. And, you know, I think at that time, Henry and Marty had stopped documenting. You know, there was a lot of, the ones when we stepped into the ones, they were destroyed. People were bombing the outsides with ink, and you couldn't even do pieces, which is why we did so many silvers, was just to cover the ink. Even this photo I think you have up here is a good example of that. If you look really closely at a lot of those photos, you'll see ink all around. Like I can see tags above them, but also coming through, and silver was the only thing that covered. Um, and I think we tried to like bring back piecing because the ones had no piecing, and we also had, it wasn't just us, it was, you know, FC, it was IBM, it was SAC and MBT crew, it was, you know, Doc and Rack 7 was coming, you know, John 1 and 156 was there. But what you and I were talking about the other day is the lost generation, you know, and it produced a lot of greatness, you know, not just us, but you know, Scent, John One, Diro, you know, just so many people who came out of that time who were after the great kind of late 70s, early 80s Renaissance. You know, this generation that I was a part of, you know, really created a lot of important figures, but they just weren't documented the way others were at that time.
And here we have a picture of you in '87, a classic. I put this one up because lifestyle was such a big part of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And this photo was taken down in Times Square and has you guys kind of in a traditional New York b-boy pose.
Yep. That's myself and Psycho with Scene and Doze. And, you know, at that time, even though chronologically Scene and Doze are not that much older than us, but for us, they were like godfathers. You know, they were mentors, not just, again, not just in terms of style, which both of these two in this photo are really, really masters of, but also of crews, you know, and how to organize and how to be disciplined and how to like stay tight knit. So we really paid a lot of attention to them. This is on 125th, obviously looking uptown. This is looking up at 137th, but that was just a typical Monday kind of, you know, it feels like we were just always there. And obviously this is in the winter, so, you know.
Right. And West, when it comes to crew, I think it's important to kind of let people know that when you're up on 125th Street and that area by the one tunnel, you know, the famous crew Ball Busters, that was their domain. And you
That
had to
was,
be very, very
yeah,
weary of them.
you did, but you know, I've always felt very blessed in my life, but particularly in graffiti, because one of the reasons this photo was possible that you're looking at least for me, is because Flight, who became a mentor to me, you know, came to my high school with probably 12 or 13 ball busters to hurt me. You know, he was looking for me because he had heard that I was down, you know, that I had written over one of his pieces. And we ended up resolving that after a long, you know, a lot of stress. But I was just a little kid, and he invited me that day once he figured out it wasn't me who he thought had gone over him. Yo, you want to come to 145th? And you know, I was scared because I was a little kid and I was kind of a toy. I had just started writing on, you know, the 220 layup, and I said, fuck it, you know, and I went with him. And I think that experience, when I walked into 145th, I met all the ball busters. I met all of FBA. I met Stan and Chaz from the Spanish Five. I met Shaman and Ravon from NTA. Like, he introduced me to all of those people immediately. So it kind of almost gave me a carte blanche to walk in there. And then I was able, then with Surge and with Risk and later with Zier and Psycho and Zame and our whole crew, we were able to kind of walk in there and claim a spot. But had I not met Flight and had I not had that kind of interaction with the Ballbusters, we would not have been in there. It just
Yeah,
happened.
my crew was not able to walk in there once they were in there. Well, but Wes, one of the things I'm noticing, right, and I've said this before about that period, right, the mid '80s and moving on, that there was a couple years where, in terms of style writing, that the letters were very simple.
Yep,
They weren't as heavily invested like TDS was, or some of those TMT, those early style masters on Broadway.
that's right.
Why so?
I think it was a combination of factors. One is the thing I had mentioned to you is we were stuck with like a simple palette because a lot of these pieces you've shown is because the trains were so destroyed. It was really hard to do full color around 84, 85. It changed in 86. This photo, I'm sorry, man, just to jump, this photo you're showing here, there's a lot of people who are not alive anymore in this photo, but this is more like the IBM crew. This is Nell, Lone, Shoot, Echo, Poke, myself, Poke's little brother, R.I.P. Edgar, who passed away. Um, but I think we were taking our cues from, I never, like that famous line in Star Wars about arrows. I always felt like arrows, a lot of people leaned on arrows too much and kind of made arrows like their crutch. So I was kind of I was going the opposite way and just keeping things dead simple. And I've had a lot of arguments with my own crew and partners and friends about like wanting to freak it a little more. And I've always kind of been more geared towards keeping things simple and legible and clean. And I was really more focused at this age, at this time, on technique and paint control and presenting something, strong and simple kind of in that limited palette.
So let's talk about those final days of writing graffiti when you realize, okay, it's time maybe to go to the walls because the trains are, you don't have access, they're cleaning them, you have new trains coming in, the new silver trains coming in. Why did you keep painting? Why did you turn your attention to walls?
Well, I kind of look at it like there was two eras. It wasn't fluid. There was the trains, that for me, and that was like 84 to 87. And then I went away to school and I kind of disappeared. And when I came back, I immediately linked with Surge and with Brew and with kind of my old crew. And that's kind of when I met Dash and I met Cause and I met Bluster and I met all these key individuals who then we kind of formed a new it was almost like a new generation of FC. It was like a new birth. And I kind of think of the 90s as a new dominance, a new time that FC kind of rose up again. We had our lives in the 80s. And our crew, by the way, wasn't just on Broadway. We had a crew that was deep in the Bronx. We had Moore and Neo and Deli and a whole bunch of people in the Bronx. We had people in various parts of the city. But I think in the 90s, we kind of came back hard in like 92, 93, 94, 95. We started a new era of kind of large scale mural production, which at the time, everybody was just doing wacky shit. It was like, there was not the discipline. I always thought of the great trains that you guys did and the United Artists cars and the TDS cars and the CIA cars and the sort of like, when you talked about in the beginning, discipline, of keeping discipline of like unified backgrounds, color schemes, keeping things sort of like, we're doing this together. It's not just, 5 different individuals with their own egos painting. It was, we're a crew and we're coming to paint and take this whole thing over. So I think in the 90s, there was a hiatus, I think, between probably 88 for us and 92. And then it just came full force in 92 and we came back.
Came full circle. So what we're looking at is very interesting. We have this wall, and we see where your lettering style is getting a lot more complicated.
Yep.
We see what you're saying about resolved backgrounds thematically.
Yep.
and there's a Zero piece next to you. But also, if I just go back, again, you start seeing that development, right? As a crew, how you start thinking conceptually about, you know, public space and walls. But
Yep.
more importantly, I want to turn the attention to style, right? That you're really fully going in and expressing your interest in style, your development of style,
Yep.
um, which in part was, you know, I think if we look at it carefully, was again just leaps and bounds by many at the time, just pushing style writing that much further out. Tell me about this. Tell me about your investment in wild style in the '90s as an art form.
Well, I think getting back, you know, there was a break. I think two things. When I look at walls now, I'm looking at these pictures and I think we didn't have the restraints we had on trains. Number one, we didn't have the time restraints. We didn't have the ink and all of the sort of destruction. And I think I just developed as an artist, as a style writer. I started like really delving a little further into letters. As you see, none of these pieces have arrows, just for the record, because I was still stuck on like trying to find ways that the letters had their own form that didn't have a lot of superfluous isms. It was really more just about the funky, you know, the letters being kind of conveying movement, conveying volume. And you know, I just, like this wall we're looking at here, you know, this was, I think, 8 or 9 of us, and we all did various forms of camo. And at that time, now it seems passe because so many, you know, hundreds of crews have done unified kind of walls like this. But I remember at this wall, at this time, it was in Graffiti at the Graffiti-a-thon, and crews from all over the tri-state area were like, oh shit, like you guys are doing this whole thing and it's so unified. You know, we could show through our art, not necessarily as individuals, but just through our painting that we were like Voltron for us.
Yeah, you guys were good at working ideas out thematically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things, not to, you know, but objectively speaking, I think that's one of the things we really brought to the game. We brought that to New York City. Again, there were a lot, I'm not saying we're the only ones. There was, of course, great crews. There was FX at the time, who was a great crew. But I think this sort of like thematic, like we got this shit locked. We have a plan. It's there. I think we really were at the fore of that. Of taking, you know, I always thought of the greatest at that on the trains of turning. I used to say like mad seeing the United Artists cars were like, they were like little postcards. They were so clean that they turned into like, you know, you could reduce inches and they look great. So this is Dash and me and David Ellis Squirm at Rikers Island.
So what were you guys doing on painting on Rikers Island?
We were invited, I think I want to say it was Trey, I'm forgetting, but we were invited there. Revolt was there, Zeph was there, we were there. A bunch of artists came and they gave us each spots in the youth correctional section of Rikers to paint. And I never forget because as we were finishing, the wardens and all the officials from the prison came by, and one of the wardens was pissed, and no one knew why, but it was because Zeph and Revolt had done a piece that said Revolt, and he didn't understand that that was Revolt's name, and he thought Revolt was, he was trying to send a message to the prisoners, you know, and he was like, right. Go over that, and we were like, nah, you know, it was like a heated moment of debate. But Dash and I were trying to do, you know, this is an African proverb at the bottom that says no condition is permanent. And this was, again, flexing, you know, these letters are quite simple, but they're transparent. You know, the background is coming through the letters. So we tried different, we explored and experimented a lot with different techniques of trying to show technique and show style, but in ways that weren't common.
This would be a recurring theme in your fine art, and we'll discover that a little later on. But you've painted with a lot of like major heads, and with the Barnstormers, which Dave Ellis is on this mural with you, but also Doze Green, who's a legend. And here we see a collaboration with him.
I'm sorry, yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you, man. This This is a wall with Doze and myself, Brew, and Surge in Tokyo. You know, it's a massive wall of a club that was a very important club in Tokyo for many years named called Harlem. And we were able to it was like the equivalent of, I don't know, man, like the tunnel. You know, we were able to paint that wall. So this is when
So,
like abstraction slowly in terms of like making letters transparent and piling them on top of each other.
I'm curious as what that must have felt like, having met all these guys in Tokyo, all you guys in another country, around this idea of being, writers. That must have been incredible.
Well, you know, I always think of the 50s and the jazz musicians who went to Paris and got this like level of appreciation for what they had created in Paris that they weren't getting here. And, you know, having done business for so long in Tokyo, the Japanese culture is one that really appreciates meaning and appreciates integrity. So for them, understanding the realness of the culture and understanding the sort of everything about the language, the art form, they really appreciated graffiti and our particular story, the story of Fame City. Um, and you know, they were into it, and we have a lot of friends in Japan who are well aware of who FC is.
Here we're
Well,
looking at a mural you painted with cause. I
this
see some writing that could that be Japanese writing above the pieces?
yeah, this is with this was a bunch of people. Cope was on this wall, Poem and Per were on this wall. There was a lot of different people painting, but this section of myself, Cause, and Days. So on the other side of the west piece is a Days piece, and up top it says Fame City International in kanji in Japanese characters. Nezum, who's down with us, is from Japan and was there to make sure it was accurate.
So it's interesting because now that you mentioned something interesting like Fame City International. So that is kind of a branding, right? There's something about branding FC globally, and this is this is a great segue into what happens next in terms of your professional career. Because at a certain point, you're saying, "Well, how long can I paint? Where do I take this?" And then that gives way for you to meet with Pnb Nation, be a part of the Pnb Nation program. Let's talk about that and the importance of Pnb in the culture, in the hip hop culture, but also the streetwear culture.
Well, I think at the time, you know, this image we're looking at is much later. This is probably 98, but in the early 90s, you know, Serge invited me, you know, I met Brew, and Brew, Bluster, and Serge had already begun slowly the foundations of PNB, and they invited me to be down and work with them and kind of make t-shirts. And but PNB had a tremendous influence, our thinking, very political. Our thinking had a big influence on the graffiti that we produced. So that wall you showed earlier, the revolution will not be televised. We did a lot of
If I can just go to one picture, that this is one of the early
yeah. So I mean,
T-shirts.
this is obviously taken from the, you know, the Olympics, the protest, raising of the fists, and you can't see it in this. This is an art spec, but what it says is the left side is a prayer. You know, it's a Muslim prayer, and it says intention, and the right side says deed. So it's like the prayer and the action. But the way the colors were laid out, it just said, you know, in one color it said indeed, and it was, you know, we were thinking we were treating the people who we were treating our not fans, but people who are down with PNB as thinking men and women, you know, as intelligent. So we were trying to send messages and almost treat it like graffiti, where our graphics were traveling. You saw a kid on the train wearing this particular T-shirt, and it was like almost like getting up. It was like that was the statement.
And what I love about this is that exactly what you're saying, marrying the culture of graffiti with the "Hello, my name is" sticker, but putting up names of Michael Stewart, Eleanor Bumpers, Philip Pinnell, who unfortunately, their lives are cut short, um, police brutality,
Hmm.
and So why, given kind of trends, you know, in terms of fashion trends, why choose a political messaging as fashion?
We weren't even thinking about fashion, to be honest with you, man. We all grew up in homes that were highly politicized. All of our families, in one way, shape, or form, Brew, Sung, Zulu, Shara, myself, Luster, we all grew up in homes where ideas about culture, race, politics, inequities, social justice, all of those things were important parts of our upbringing. Um, and so we all had graphic skills, and it was really about translating ideas through graphics. Like this you're looking at here, this is, recipes, because we all like to cook. So these were like, um, you know, we've we had fun too, focused on things that were not, um, at that time all you saw was graffiti graphics. You saw like a very simplistic interpretation of youth culture, and we kind of, I think, helped to elevate that and be critical thinkers. And we saw ourselves more as cultural critics than as a clothing company.
Well, it's interesting that you would also promote well-being, you know, in these, you, the the uh, the acronym Pnb, please no bacon, and we
Yeah,
see your recipe, West Supreme Steamed Snapper recipe, which
yeah.
I thought was clever. It's really clever, isn't it?
I mean, that was the kind of, we were just having fun. We weren't businessmen. We became businessmen, but we didn't plan to be businessmen. We just planned on doing cool shit. And then, time as business grew, we were forced to learn the business and learn about the math and learn about production of clothing and learn about importing and duties and discounts and shipping and all the things you have to learn to run a business. And we
And
learned.
how difficult was it, given you know that so many clothing companies were blowing up at that time and becoming very successful? How challenging was it to build a brand?
It was very hard. I always look at it like we always had a hand tied behind our backs. We were at a little bit of a disadvantage because we had zero skills coming into it, business skills. I also, I've often not argued, but I've discussed with people like graffiti artists are some of the most cunning, intelligent people I've ever met. And I think we had a tenacious attitude and we had a skill set. We had kind of the hunger to do it, and by any means, and just make it happen. So I think we definitely took lumps and we learned the hard way, but it was definitely challenging.
And after PNB, you went on to create And Sons. Tell us about the And Sons project.
Really, it was just, Bluster and I had broken up. Zulu and Brew and the rest of the team had continued with PNB, and we just were taking on a new project. And we had a partner in Japan, Ken, who passed away, who was a great kind of brother to us. And we just started a brand, and it was unique because it was designed in Brooklyn, where we were based, but produced and sold in Japan. So it was a sort of like Brooklyn, Tokyo connection. And of course, there are many people who were making those connections, like Futura and Stash, and other folks and Cause and people who are making that connection between New York and Tokyo. But we were definitely trying to strengthen that bond. And it was a little bit more sophisticated, and our approach was really about found graphics. We didn't do much with the computer. Most of what we did was, except like this hang tag you're showing here, Manhattan Mathematics. That's like weird New York things only.
5% or no?
Not, no, that's not 5% of
That's not
knowledge.
the.
Right there is how to get around in New York, but not many New Yorkers even know about this. It's like a formula to find any address.
Oh, okay. So it's interesting, Wes, because all this, right? It seems to me that uh, your trajectory was an unexpected one, particularly into the branding and a fashion world, the design world. Uh, you, you know, it all leads up to where you are today, right? As a as someone who is in one of the most coveted brands in this country, Supreme, right? And there's a whole different tactic to what that brand is than your other brands, and as to where this brand, from what I can tell, is so strategic. It's so calculated, in the way it gets around in the world.
Mm.
Uh, how does all the experience that you've gained brought you here?
Well, I just look at, I look at Supreme, it's kind of like, as I said earlier, in graffiti, it wasn't just me, it was a crew. And we accomplished what we did because we did it together. And we were like, even though we were young, we were all stars at that time. I think with Supreme, there's a crew of people who are very good at what they do. It's not just me. There's a bunch of people who together, we have a variety of skill sets, which my experience has definitely helped me. My graffiti experience informs what I do every day. My Pnb experience and taking the lumps, learning business, has informed how I operate today. So I've learned a lot, and an idea that's been coming up lately for me is that, knowledge is easy to acquire. Anyone can read books and learn, but wisdom comes from experience, and you can't really teach that. That only comes from experience. And I look at the team at Supreme, and I think, for the most part, it's a team that has a lot of wisdom. So they, it's all kind of, it's a strong team that produces. So again, it's not easy to do. It's making very complicated things look easy, just like the way we painted trains or painted walls. We take this, massive space and make it look like no big thing to cover it with something beautiful. Doing business at the level that we're doing business at is completely challenging, but the idea is to make it look effortless. It's not the idea.
One of the
Part of it is just to, it's just there and it's cool.
Yeah, and one of the benefits of working with Supreme is that you get to meet a lot of successful artists.
Yeah.
And we see you here with John Baldessari, Lou Reed, and there's a photo of RZA. What have you learned from people who are successful?
Man, I've learned so many things. I mean, I've gotten to meet some pretty amazing people, but the most important thing, I think my biggest takeaway is that, they're just human beings, just like us. There's really, at their core, everybody is just, I mean, it sounds cliche to say, but everybody is just, they're human beings who found themselves in these positions. And a lot of them are iconic and important for different reasons, but I like being around different people, and some people I love and some people were not cool, but most of them have been really cool, and I've learned a lot from all of them. There are some individuals, like in this photo, RZA and John Baldessari happen to be two people that I learned a whole lot from, just in the brief times we shared. And, I'm just a sponge trying to absorb everything I can.
So I want to backtrack because there's another lane that you occupy as an artist, and you started considering this sort of late in life, but yet were involved when you were young. Let's talk about the transition, right? And thinking about yourself as a creator, as a creative, right? When you identify yourself as a writer is one thing. When you start seeing work in gallery spaces, it's another thing.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those early days, about the galleries, and what was your impression about graffiti in galleries?
I mean, in the early days, it was more of like this show, the Labrizzi exhibition was graffiti artists and East Village artists, and I think at that time it was more like a novelty to have graffiti artists in exhibitions. You guys, again, your generation had done that. I think for us it was like new terrain, but not super common. But there were few. There was the Fun Gallery. There were certain places that 99 Ag. There were places where we could display work, but not many.
And so when you were seeing all these artists exhibiting, what were you considering for yourself as an artist? That could you possibly do that? Were you interested in that, or were you just still thinking about fashion and design?
No, I was very interested in it. I think I've been an artist since I can remember. I've been drawing and painting, and I've considered myself and do always will as an artist first. I think my path was kind of in a way chosen for me only because, when I had my first child, Sonia, I was quite young. I was 24, and I think I had to make a decision to pursue business because I wanted her to be okay, and I didn't want to. I couldn't take the leap to step into the world of art, knowing that it was insecure. Knowing that I couldn't. There was no guarantee to it, and I think at that time I just decided to focus on work so that I could, feed my family basically. That was the sort of guiding principle at the time. So I didn't give up on my work, and I still, as you know, I pursued my art, but for me, it wasn't about being a commercial success or selling out paintings, or, it feels great, as we talked about the other day. It feels awesome when I sell work because it's a validation of what you've created, but I didn't step into that to become for that to be my livelihood. I paint because I love to paint, and that's pretty much it.
So I want to dig a little deeper into that with you, about your painting. You and I have discussed painting and process and meaning for some time. I've seen you develop as a painter. You become one of my favorite painters. I understand the thread that you're stitching together with your work. We could see it actually here in these two cover images. One that speaks to what you were saying before about letters and transparencies and abstraction. The cover of From Style Writing to Art is a wonderful cover because it's so dynamic. It captures a lot of the energy of graffiti, but also the abstract expressionists, which were influencing you. And some of the earlier works, you were kind of, these were gestural paintings, right? That we always said that this was muscle memory from graffiti, but yet something else that you were looking for.
Okay.
Let's talk about having the courage and the wherewithal to try something different on canvas.
Yeah, I think for me at this time, I started to get frustrated with just the mechanical, technical nature of graffiti. And I always felt like, when I found myself sketching to do actual pieces and outlines, my sketch was always, to me, cooler than the real finished outline I did. Because in graffiti, perfection is so important and technique is so critical that the sketchy, loose lines were always like what attracted me. And the freedom of letting your hands fly and letting your body move. And so much of this work that we're looking at now, these paintings are, 8 and 10 and 12 feet. And it really has more to do with, they are gestural, and they are sort of unconscious gestures. They're not something that was precomposed, and I found tremendous freedom in that ability to not have a preconceived notion of what the outcome might be, and just start playing with shapes and forms that were, to me, very much tied into letter forms. And so therefore they felt natural. Just like, again, like you and I have talked about in martial arts or in fighting techniques, there is sort of muscle memory, things you do over and over, and they become second nature. These strokes became second nature, just the way a tag is second nature, or doing a West piece. It's just, I can do it with my eyes closed. The difference here is that the outcome is unknown, and that sort of expressionistic direction that I kind of, when I first saw those, the New York school and the Franz Kleins and Pollocks and Clifford Stills and the abstract expressionist movement, it really struck a chord with me about the way art can be made, which doesn't have to be about planning and technique.
Wes, can you tell me what year this painting was painted?
This was 2004.
2004. So we're talking, wow, how many years between periods, right? A good 40 something years, 50 years between the Abex and graffiti.
Yep.
And it's wonderful. That's one of the things that I found really interesting, right? This dialogue across time and space, between you and a certain art period. But I think your approach was different. It wasn't like you wanted to be very focused and individual about your what's informing these works.
Yeah, I just wanted to break away. I didn't want it to be as literal as, tags. It wasn't about, the patterns of tagging or the patterns of clear letters. It was more about the energy that, when you see a train pull up in the station, and a lot of the photos you showed before, and obviously not my work, but just all graffiti artists, when it's at a high level, there's energy. Those pieces are pulsing and glowing. And I wanted to
Pause one there for 1 second there, because that's so important what you're saying. There are a couple things that I want to highlight about some of your work. And it's both energy and temperature. And here it's one of the things we can see this in this painting, right? How it pulsates, right? How it moves, how it dances in space, and the degrees of grays that bring that, that the white to you.
Yeah, I mean, and this was, I made this painting. This is like again, like a temper painting. This was done in Days and Crash's studio. They were gracious enough to let me paint there. And this, I think, again, around maybe 2004 or 5. But the idea was to be able to, again, represent the same feeling and energy. I always felt like I was communicating with writers. Graffiti artist sees this and they know whoever did that comes from where I come from. They understand the movement and the action happening. But at the same time, it spoke to a lot of other things. It spoke to martial arts, it spoke to dance, it spoke to other kinds of forms of movement that are more universal and not necessarily constricted to graffiti. But using spray paint and using oil sticks and using different media allowed me to toy with that.
You also mentioned jazz as an influencing factor in your work.
Yep.
Especially, when I think about these works, this series, this body, when you started kind of moving, it's really interesting. I just want people to pay attention to the development of his work here, right? Because if we just backtrack a little bit, in such a short amount of time, you start refining what you are trying to get at, right? And then you arrive at a space where you're starting to use color. You're comfortable with color. You've been great at color, but this time you're letting something else happen. Tell me about the Freedom Suite works.
Well, those were, you and I have laughed and joked and we talked about it a lot. I'm colorblind, so, color has always been a particular kind of challenge. I understand it, I can feel it and relate to it, but it's hard to identify color sometimes. And every now and then, even with my small children, I'll be like, I have to ask my son, is this blue? And he'll be like, no, that's purple, Dad. Or is this green? He's like, no, that's brown. And I think that leap of going from sort of blacks and whites and into color was important for me, more as a step forward. And trying to, these works were more about pinpointing, mixing the two things that we talked about earlier about the sort of pure abstract expressionism, but then also trying to get into this sort of like finding beautiful shapes within those, that were created sort of unintentionally and sort of emphasizing certain areas,
But the other thing that I really loved about this series, and it's quite amazing that you say that you're colorblind, is that you managed to use color beautifully. And I say that because I remember reacting to them and saying, wow, these have temperature. And that's a really unusual thing to have in work, so pronounced. And what was really wonderful, I remember, and I had written, the painting moves through temperate stages, not just in tonal values, but with aggressive brushstrokes and graphic lines throughout, which in fact is kind of, again, that ties back to the graffiti. And we kind of can see those hints here, right? Like, because even on the lower part of the painting, right, you're creating these spaces and breaking up spaces similar to the graffiti pieces.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. This was more of an experimentation with, again, with these two worlds of like refined, precise, technical letter form and negative spaces mixed with this sort of, you know, pre composition. And the composition came from just an unconscious sort of brushwork. And so, you know, I was playing with those two planes and trying to figure out a way to solve for those two.
And you would take that, you know, to a larger scale. You're not known as a muralist, but you, in LA, you did take on a huge mural where you put all this to practice. Let's talk about this experience, because this was for the show.
Um,
Um,
yeah, no, I mean, this was just, you know, it's actually like all, I think, people who painted subway trains, it's easier to paint big spaces than small spaces, you know, so dominating an 80-foot wall is in a way is easier than a 4-foot painting. You know, it's because you're free and you have all this room, and you're able to really, in this particular kind of painting, where it's really about your body and the gestures, it's particularly it's a good canvas, if you will, to be able to make these kind of paintings.
One of the things that I've always liked about you is your ability to dig in a little deeper into the work and deduct from it. And that's one of the things we keep seeing in your work, from graffiti onto the canvas works. And you, in the paintings that we're looking at, again, you're kind of thinking something differently about, you know, the line movement, the gestures, but empty spaces.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that would come back again into your work in a radical way. And I want to talk about some of the last series of works that you've done, the totems, and the icon, the symbolist work. And again, part of what I want people to see in all of this, right, is that deduction. Here we see a print that you did of some of your line work. It's just the line, the purity of the line.
Mm-hmm.
And again, another painting of yours on linen, which gives us a clue as to where you would end up going with the works that I have just mentioned. And so here we have the totem. Here you start exploring sculpture. Tell me about this process and why move away from all that rich, dynamic painting to something so simple like this work?
Well, I think at this time I was trying to find a way to express in simple graphic terms what we communicate with letters without using letters. And so a lot of these shapes and these figures are overlapped and laid over one another, you know, in drawing, and then sort of me finding shapes. And I started to realize that these symbols were sort of timeless, and they felt to me like glyphs from the past. They felt like cave paintings. They felt like hieroglyphics. They felt like symbols where you didn't really need to know that something said west or said mare. You kind of just, you know, and I think the sculptural element was something you helped me get through a lot of, just trying to figure out how to build sculptures. And the thought of totems became very, they made a lot of sense, because totems are an ancient sort of symbol, and they're a way that, you know, they represented so much about culture. And I think for this, it was almost, once again, you know, a graffiti artist would look at this and understand it completely. They would see this and get it. They wouldn't need to ask a lot of questions. And for someone who's not a graffiti artist, I think it's dynamic, and it stands on its own. And for me, it was more about creating a new language, a new sort of letter form, if you will, without creating letters.
We see that here in the painting.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you're willing to be brave and try something new and different. And again, like you said, kind of moving away from everything you knew.
Yeah, I mean, and this is really using a lot of shadow work, and from those sculptural tests I would shine light through them and project them and come up with these new shapes, and they started to, you know, they started to become masks. They started to become other things, and creatures and animals and individuals, and I started to see things in them. But the root of all of it, at the very essence of it all, was letters, you know, and not because of any other reason than it's something that I know so well, and not in terms of comfort, but in terms of my very nature, the way I, you know, the way my whole body moves. And I think probably true for you and many graffiti artists, we move in this way because we're so used to these gestures that we've been doing for so many years.
So now we're looking at a smaller sculpture of yours. And West, I'm curious to know, I mean, being so prolific as a painter and doing these wonderful sculptures, where are you now with your art and your thoughts about art making, given that you gotten to this point with it?
I think, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I've always considered myself an artist, and I actually dream of being in a position to be in the studio and just make art and have that be my vocation and be my everyday job. You know, again, I've always felt like I have to, living in the real world, I have to kind of, and it's not, I don't mean that in a negative way, I mean, but just like, again, paying bills and doing the things that life requires. My focus these past few years has been really work, but I intend on, I do this in cycles. Every few years I come back and I dive deep. And so for me, you know, I'm on the precipice of a next cycle, you know, and I just have to pick a time and a place basically and get into it. I
So
just, you know,
given that, Wes, given that you've given it a hard pause, do you have any idea where you'll pick up?
I definitely
I
want to
mean,
pick up, you know, this is
you left off here.
right. I want to pick up here because I felt like, you know, getting back to, you were talking about John Baldessari and things I've learned from people. And one of the things I learned from John Baldessari is he said to me, you know, I spent 10 years making bad Jackson Pollock paintings, before he started on sort of making his iconic typographic paintings and sort of writing a new chapter. And sometimes you have to do that kind of work to get to the next, to arrive at the place where you belong. And these works, I feel like I literally was just scratching the surface with the totems and those symbols. I feel like I was just beginning to get into something. So I want to get back into them. And in my downtime when I'm not doing that, when I'm on these sort of multi-year hiatuses, I'm always thinking about that. I'm thinking about how that's going to progress and what needs to happen to make it progress. But to answer
So
the question,
Wes, this is why I started the conversation around discipline, right? It takes a great deal of discipline to get to that point, a great deal of discipline to say, okay, I'm going to put this down because this requires this, but I have the discipline to still think about this part of my life as a creator. And I'm glad you're still thinking about it and aiming towards that. And that it's okay. I think that's a lesson for all of us, that it's okay to step away and
yeah,
rethink and recalculate our work, our purpose, and the
100.
timing.
Yeah, and also again, I think it's like anything in life. When you do something because you love it, it's good. When you do something for another reason, whatever that reason may be, you're on shakier ground. But when you do something that's pure, that you're like, I love this. I do this because I love it. That never fails. So I look at everything I've created, whether it's a painting on chain or a sculpture or anything, and I know I did them with love. I didn't do them because someone had a gun to my head or someone was forcing
Sure.
me. I wanted to do it, and that expression was pure. So, and there's a freedom in that too, is not being bound by the commercial realities of
Right.
being an artist, where you don't have to produce on demand. And I'm not saying all artists have to do that, but many do. And so for me to have the true the freedom and the blessing to be able to step into it at will and step out of it at will, is something I enjoy.
So, West, I want to ask our audience if you have any questions for West. Let's do a quick Q&A because I know we have a lot of our friends out there, and I want to spread the love around. And Wes, I'll say this, going back and looking at your work, preparing for this, it brought up great memories for me about dialogues with you about being an artist and the discipline of being an artist, the challenges, the risk, and the risk reward, right? And that clearly it was outlined in terms of how we look at your work, and how you experiment and you arrive at this place, which actually shows clarity and maturity. And I have to say, I was impressed then and still am impressed now.
Well, I'm not saying because of that, but also I would be remiss if, getting back to the conversations we had earlier about mentorship. I mean, you have always been a great mentor to me in art, specifically in the creation of art and what it means to dedicate and create work and applying meaning to that work and valuing that work. And so, as I said earlier, most of our great mentors are our friends. You are,
I appreciate that.
and important one. So I'm not saying that to pat you on the back, but I'm just keeping it 100% real. And not just to me. And I just want to say, record, when you and I met, that was a big moment in my life because I was probably 16 years old and you were on 120. You were a legend. You were already someone I was looking up to. And I remember you commenting on some of the trains that were passing, and you said something to the effect of, yo, you guys are doing your thing. You guys are really doing it. And I remember going home that day feeling so proud that you had come to 125th Street and kind of given us that little, little gap, and that gave me the strength, and made me feel like, damn, maybe we're doing something right.
Right. No, I appreciate hearing that. But again, you are, and the odd thing is you became one of my favorite painters and thinkers in all of this. I want to share some questions. Do you plan on publishing a book of your work?
Yeah. And I'm laughing because this is my life's goal. We only have short time on the earth, as you know. Yeah. And as we all know, we've seen a lot of people pass away. And for me, it's very important because we've all have unique stories. My particular story, I've been working on this for a long time. So yes, I am planning on that. I don't know when and how and where, but yes, definitely something I hope to accomplish soon.
Dre asks, West, what does your art mean to you?
If I had to put it in a word, I would just say, again, not to sound cliche, but it's freedom. It's freedom. It's some people like to go to the beach, which I do too, but some people like to go to this space or this place where they're able to be themselves 100%. And for me, when I'm painting and I don't have any distraction and I'm making art and it's not about family or work or home or none of it. It's just about you and your expression. So art, for me, I would say, is freedom and the ability to be free. It's a luxury to make art.
Yeah, it really is. I take it for granted. Another question for you: which trains do you remember that blew your mind? Something overlooked or not well documented?
I could say many things, but what I wouldn't say is, the ground, as we've discussed, the ground of the Renaissance of you guys has been covered. So I'm not even going to go there and debate all of those great masterpieces. For me, because I was right there and I saw it happen in front of my eyes, I'd say two things stand out to me: FBA and just the of TAC and Airborne and those dudes of taking everything you guys did and reducing it to its simple graphic essence. Those guys were really different level, and I don't think they're given enough credit in terms of what would become modern graffiti. You know, they kind of set the graphic tone of like the next generation. So I would say FBA, and then the second one, who's often overlooked, again, back to the lost generation concept, we are all overlooked in that
Right.
way,
Yes.
would be John 1, and Kyle,
Yes.
56, because a lot of people don't know that John and Kyle pulled out 3, 4 cars a weekend, you know, whole cars, you know, Iran Contra, you know, just so many different cars that they did that were like really masterpieces. At the time, they just seemed like no big deal. But when I look back at them and I think about them now, I'm like, damn, like John was, we talk about unafraid. You know, John was unafraid. And John was the first person I literally, I remember being in the 145th Street train tunnel with John, spraying into a cap and throwing the paint at, you know, at the car. And everybody was like laughing at him. Like, what are you doing? This bullshit, you know, and like, and John was just on something
Right.
else. And
Wasn't he painting with acrylics on train as well? As well.
he was painting with, he was just experimenting and back to this concept of freedom and back to this idea of expression and not being afraid. John, you know, and I got to spend many a night and day with John in the tunnels. And I think he is one, again, along with a lot of others from my time, like Giro and Scent and Serve and all these other greats. John is definitely one that I remember as being like a prolific master. Now he's known as a fine artist, and that's great, but he's someone that
Yeah.
stands.
He's very prolific.
Yeah.
So I have a question from Crazy Legs. He's asking if that poster behind you is original.
And not only is it original, this poster belonged to Dondi. You know, so this was Dondi's poster. And many years later, you know, after Dondi had passed away, I was talking with his brother, and he wanted to buy some art or trade some art, and I couldn't afford any of the paintings that at that time that Dondi had, and he's like, I have this beautiful poster that he brought back from Paris, and you know, and just the fact that it belonged to him, not only is it a beautiful poster, but obviously it's Rocksteady and Bambata, and you know, you can see what the fact that it was personal and something of Dondi's, it always, you know, has a special meaning to me. And so I work every day, so you know.
I have a question for you in regards to Don, and that, you know, we're paying a lot of respects to him more and more over the years, where he's being recognized and rightfully so. What are your thoughts on his work and his impact on the culture?
I mean, you know, he's such a giant. It's kind of hard to summarize, but
Sure.
I just feel like Dondi was the prototypical. You know, he was the great style master. You know, he was the great sort of guide. You know, it's hard to compare him to another, though he was amongst people like your brother and many others who are greats, you know, who are also masters of the craft. So I don't want to make it sound like he was the only one, but he was definitely a template setter for so many things. You know, the coloring schemes, the letter styles, the cleanness, you know, there's so many things that he brought. And I'm not even, you know, some Gandhi pieces aren't even his most well-known pieces, you know, like his sort of most celebrated cars. But I guess outside of knowing him, you know, as a human being, I think when I think of Dondi, in my time, I think of Doc, and I think of Doc's influence on the rest of graffiti, and that sort of, just like we were talking earlier about FC and this sort of like transition of style. You know, there are young kids down with FC now who are doing it, who you can trace the DNA of their style right back to us, you know, 5 years ago. And similarly, I feel like when I look at Doc paint and I look at Psy paint and I look at some of like the younger TC5 dudes, and I think that line is so crystal clear back to Dondi. And by the way, it's not just a regurgitation of Dondi. It's an elevation. You know, it's been innovated. But so when I think of Dondi, whenever I look at a Doc piece, my mind goes right away to Dondi, and not in a bad way. Again, not like Doc's copying. Doc's his own in his own right, but it's so clear where those things come from. You know, those structures come from. So Yeah, obviously one of my favorites, but I can't think of a graffiti artist who wouldn't say he's in their top three.
Right, right. Well, yeah, that's the power of his legacy, you know. And as we think about legacies, and as we get older, and our impact on culture and art, you know, like when we survey you, um, and the worlds and people you've touched, um, and you're still young, which is pretty exciting. You know, you have a lot more to offer us. Uh, I have to say, you know, I look forward to this next chapter, and when you start creating for yourself,
Thank you, brother.
and that you pour your heart and your love and your reverence for both art and the culture you come from. Because I think I've always said this. I think that you have something very special that you're tapping into that, it hasn't fully matured, to say, and I think it takes years for an artist to mature. As you know, you're speaking with Baldessari and all these guys, that you get to this process, this refinement process. And we talked about this, right, about the line, and well, how we see this refinement and this ultimate clarity in work as an adult, as a mature artist, that has something to say
Mm,
about his life. So I look forward to what you end up with in the latter years of your life. But up to this point, you've done an incredible job in you know, in the capacity you could make the work.
thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. And again, you know, you've always been much like a great champion of my work, so I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. So Wes, on behalf of the museum, I want to thank you for showing up for us, brother, and to share this story, to share your work. Means a lot. It means a lot to me because, you know, you and I have always bonded over this stuff and these stories, but also the community at large needed to
Yep.
hear from you, and needed to see the breadth of your story, you know, and the contributions you made up to this point.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, and you have a lot of heads in here thanking you.
Um,
I saw Cause in here earlier. I see Michael Walsh. I see Chino, Dero. You have a lot of heads in here, who came in. Mr. Stash.
so,
It's good to see you all here.
so,
Psycho. So it can create. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, that's, you know, that people would show up says a lot.
man, I appreciate it. You know, this is our
Peace
family.
Cause. Yeah.
That's our family. You know, we're a big family. So I'm super appreciative, man.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, you know, this is one of the things I appreciate about this moment and this platform and this time, because when you talk about a family, a community, and again, I use that both lightly and also personally, because it's a big community that is supporting each other, that has supported each other, tries to, and advocates for each other, shows up, particularly at a time of COVID, where lives are at risk, and, you know, our stories matter. Your story matters. And so it's important to have these conversations, right? And to at least have something of record in uncertain times.
100%. You know, and it just makes me think. And it's not about me or you, but you know, I think it was Cameron or someone, I forget who it was, but saying, you know, we have to give flowers to people when they're here. You know, not give flowers to people when they're gone. You know, and we've all in this community, we've lost a lot of people in the past couple years, and it's like, yeah, we got to celebrate people. Like I remember when Faze passed away, being like, damn, like the gravity of that,
Yeah.
of loss and how important he was and what a monumental figure. And it's like, yo, he needed more celebration when he was alive. You know, he did, and it's not about him. It's just there are many like him. You know what I mean? And it is important to give people their flowers and their love while they're here. So I'm in agreement with that thought.
Yo, so we're sending you a bouquet, brother.
Thank you, brother.
So I'll leave you with that, and I thank you, and I thank everybody who's joined us. And till you know, I'm able to fly to the West.
We'll do it soon, B.
You know how it is, brother.
All right, brother.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.